My mother always said my sister had certain rights to our childhood cabin, and for years I accepted that. But recently, a single call from the bank exposed something no one in the family was prepared to face. My name is Rachel, and I'm 34 years old. I live in Portland now, but I grew up spending summers at our family cabin in the Oregon mountains. It's a modest place, nothing fancy, but it holds every important memory from my childhood. The smell of pine, the creak of the wooden floors, the way morning light filtered through the kitchen window. All of it shaped who I became. For as long as I can remember, my mother made one thing clear about that cabin. My sister Emma had certain rights to it. Emma is 2 years older than me, and we've never been particularly close. She moved to California after college and rarely visits the cabin anymore. But growing up, she was always Mom's favorite, the responsible one, the one who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. I accepted this dynamic without question for years. Even when Mom would casually mention Emma's rights to the cabin, I nodded along, assuming it meant something about birth order or responsibility. I never asked for specifics. The cabin has been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it in 1952 with his own hands, and my father inherited it when Grandpa passed. When Dad died 5 years ago, the cabin went to Mom, and we all assumed it would eventually be divided between Emma and me somehow. Mom never gave us details, just those vague references to Emma's special claim on the property. I trusted that Mom would handle everything fairly when the time came. Mom passed away last month after a brief illness. The funeral was small, just Emma, me, and a few close family friends. Emma flew in from San Francisco, looking polished and distant as always. We barely spoke during the service, both lost in our own grief. I assumed we'd deal with the cabin and other estate matters once we'd both had time to process our loss. But Emma surprised me by bringing it up at the reception, her voice matter of fact. "I'll need to start making arrangements for the cabin," Emma said while we stood by the church coffee table. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, like she was discussing weekend plans. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I didn't know how to respond. She continued eating her small sandwich, avoiding eye contact with me. The other mourners chatted quietly around us, completely unaware of the tension building between the two sisters. Emma sounded so certain about her claim. I spent the drive back to Portland replaying Emma's words. She'd spoken about the cabin like it was already decided, like there was no discussion needed between us. But Mom had never explicitly told me about any formal arrangement giving Emma sole ownership. I'd always assumed we'd inherit it together, maybe take turns using it or find some way to share it. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. 2 weeks later, I decided to call Mom's bank to ask about her accounts and the estate. I was listed as a beneficiary on several accounts, so they were willing to discuss the basics with me. The banker was helpful and patient, walking me through the various holdings and assets. Everything seemed straightforward until she mentioned something about a property transfer that had been completed 6 months ago. My pulse quickened before she even finished explaining. "The cabin was transferred into your name in April," the banker said gently. "Your mother came in with all the paperwork and said she wanted to ensure it went to you specifically. She seemed very deliberate about the arrangement. I felt the room spinning around me. My name. Not Emma's name. Not both our names. The cabin that Emma claimed rights to was legally mine and had been for months. I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. The next few days were torture. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. I kept thinking about Emma's confident words at the funeral, about how she'd need to make arrangements for the cabin. She had no idea that those arrangements would be impossible because the cabin was no longer part of Mom's estate. It belonged to me now, free and clear. But telling her felt impossible. I drove up to the cabin the following weekend, needing to see it with this new knowledge. Walking through the rooms felt different now, knowing they were truly mine. I ran my hands along the kitchen counter where Mom used to make pancakes on summer mornings. I sat in Dad's old reading chair by the fireplace. Every corner held memories of our family together, and now I was the sole keeper of this place. The guest bedroom where Emma used to sleep felt particularly charged with emotion. Her old Nancy Drew books were still on the shelf, and I could picture her curled up reading by the window. We'd shared so many summers here, building forts in the woods and roasting marshmallows by the fire pit. Despite our differences, the cabin had always been neutral territory for us. Now it would likely become a battleground. I found myself looking through Mom's old papers in the cabin's small office. Most of it was routine: utility bills, maintenance records, insurance documents. But tucked in the back of a drawer, I discovered several drafts of a letter Mom had apparently been trying to write. The handwriting was shaky, probably from her illness, but the content was clear. She'd been struggling with how to explain her decision about the cabin. The letter drafts revealed Mom's internal conflict about the inheritance. She wrote about watching Emma become increasingly disconnected from the cabin over the years, visiting less and less frequently. She mentioned how I'd continued to come up regularly, maintaining the property and keeping family traditions alive. One draft included the phrase, "Rachel understands what this place means to our family." Mom had been watching us more carefully than I realized. But there were also passages about Emma that showed Mom's deep love and concern for her older daughter. She wrote about Emma's successful career and busy life in California, how proud she was of Emma's accomplishments. She seemed to worry that Emma saw the cabin as a burden rather than a blessing. In one draft, she wrote, "I fear Emma would sell it the moment she inherited it." Reading Mom's private thoughts felt invasive, but it helped me understand her impossible position. She loved both her daughters, but had different concerns about each of us. She worried about my financial stability and wanted to give me something solid and valuable. She worried about Emma's emotional distance from family traditions and wanted to preserve what our grandfather had built. She'd tried to balance fairness against preservation. I spent that night in my old childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed every hour, just like it had during countless summer nights when Emma and I were kids. But now I lay there alone, carrying the weight of a secret that would change everything between us. The drive back to Portland was filled with anxiety about the inevitable conversation with Emma. She'd been texting me occasionally about estate matters, clearly expecting to discuss cabin arrangements soon. Each message felt like a small betrayal, knowing what I knew. I kept drafting and deleting responses, unable to find words that wouldn't immediately escalate into conflict. The silence was becoming its own kind of lie. Back home, I called my friend Sarah, desperate for advice about the situation. Sarah listened patiently as I explained everything. Mom's secret transfer, Emma's confident claims, the letter drafts I'd found. "You have to tell her," Sarah said simply. "The longer you wait, the harder it will be." But knowing she was right didn't make the prospect any less terrifying. That evening, I sat down to write Emma an email. I must have started it 20 different ways, trying to find the right tone and approach. Every draft sounded either too casual or too dramatic. Finally, I settled on something simple. "Emma, I need to talk to you about the cabin. Can we schedule a call?" My finger hovered over the send button for several minutes before I finally pressed it. Emma responded within hours, suggesting we talk the next evening. Her email was brief and businesslike, probably assuming I wanted to discuss logistics about shared ownership or selling the property. I spent the entire next day rehearsing what I would say, trying to anticipate her questions and reactions. The weight of Mom's decision felt heavier with each passing hour. Evening approached like a storm front. As I dialed Emma's number, I realized that this phone call would fundamentally change our relationship as sisters. There was no going back once I revealed what Mom had done. Emma would have every right to feel betrayed, not just by Mom's decision, but by my delay in telling her. I poured myself a glass of wine and picked up the phone, knowing that our family's future hung in the balance. The phone rang twice before Emma answered, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. "Hi, Rachel. I'm glad we're finally going to sort out the cabin situation." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything between us. My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone, searching for the right words to begin this impossible conversation. "Actually, Emma, "There's something I need to tell you about the cabin," I began, my voice already betraying my nervousness. I could hear her shifting in her chair, probably settling in for what she assumed would be a practical discussion about property management or selling logistics. The silence stretched between us as I gathered my courage. When I finally spoke the words, they came out in a rush. "Mom transferred the cabin into my name 6 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Emma breathing on the other end, processing what I'd just told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different, cold and measured in a way that made my stomach drop. "What do you mean it's in your name?" she asked slowly. I knew that tone from our childhood arguments, the controlled anger that meant Emma was trying very hard not to explode. "Mom went to the bank in April and had it legally transferred to me," I continued, forcing myself to keep talking despite the growing tension. "I just found out when I called about her estate. The banker said Mom was very deliberate about it, that she specifically wanted it to go to me." The words felt heavy and final in the space between us. Emma's breathing had become audible, sharp little intakes that told me she was struggling to maintain her composure. "How long have you known about this?" Emma's question cut through the silence like a blade. I could hear her moving around, probably pacing her apartment the way she used to pace our childhood bedroom when she was upset. Her voice had that dangerous calm that meant she was fighting to stay in control. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, wishing I could see her face, wishing this conversation wasn't happening over hundreds of miles. The distance between us felt insurmountable. "I found out 2 weeks ago when I called the bank," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emma, I had no idea Mom had done this. I was as shocked as you are right now." But even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded. 2 weeks of keeping this secret. 2 weeks of letting her believe she had rights to the cabin. The silence stretched again, and I could practically feel her anger building through the phone connection. 2 weeks, Emma repeated slowly, and I heard something that might have been a bitter laugh. 2 weeks you've known that everything I believed about our inheritance was a lie. And you said nothing. Her voice was getting louder now, the controlled facade beginning to crack. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling the conversation spiral away from me. There was no good way to explain why I'd waited. No words that would make this betrayal feel smaller. I tried to explain about needing time to process, about finding Mom's letter drafts, about not knowing how to break the news. But with every word I spoke, I could hear how inadequate my explanations sounded. Emma had always been quick to spot weakness, and my guilt was written all over my stammering attempts at justification. "You found Mom's letters?" she interrupted sharply. "What letters? What else haven't you told me?" The conversation shifted as I described finding Mom's drafts in the cabin office. I tried to explain Mom's reasoning gently, about her concerns that Emma had grown distant from the cabin, about her fear that Emma might sell it. But I could hear Emma's sharp intake of breath at each revelation. These weren't just facts I was sharing. They were Mom's private judgments about her daughters, preserved in shaky handwriting. Every word felt like another small betrayal. "So Mom thought I would sell it," Emma said, her voice tight with hurt. "She thought I didn't care about our family's history, about Grandpa's work, about everything that place represents." I could hear tears in her voice now, mixed with the anger. The controlled Emma was crumbling, revealing the wounded daughter underneath. I wanted to comfort her, to take back Mom's harsh words, but they were already out there between us. "That's not exactly what she wrote," I said carefully, though we both knew I was softening the truth. Mom's concerns had been clear and specific. Emma's visits to the cabin had become sporadic over the years, and when she did come, she often complained about the maintenance costs and the remoteness. Mom had been watching, taking notes in her heart about which daughter truly cherished the family legacy. Now those observations had become legal reality. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her breathing heavily. "You know what the worst part is, Rachel. It's not even about the money or the property. It's that Mom made this decision and never gave me a chance to prove her wrong. She just assumed I didn't care enough, and now I'll never be able to show her otherwise." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and I felt my own throat tighten with emotion. "I don't think Mom meant it as a judgment," I offered, though the words felt hollow. We both knew that's exactly what it was, a judgment about our characters, our values, our commitment to family. Mom had chosen me as the keeper of our family's most precious place, and in doing so, she'd essentially declared Emma unworthy of the role. The weight of that decision was crushing both of us in different ways. "What do you plan to do with it?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice businesslike again. The shift caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought beyond the immediate crisis of telling her the truth. The cabin was mine, legally and completely, but I'd been so focused on the family drama that I hadn't considered my actual plans. Did Emma think I would sell it? Did she think I was capable of the very betrayal Mom had feared from her? I don't know, I admitted honestly. I never expected this. I always assumed we'd figure out some way to share it, or maybe one of us would buy out the other's half. I never imagined Mom would just give it to me outright. The truth was, the cabin felt too big for one person to own alone. It was meant to be a family place, filled with cousins and grandchildren and holiday gatherings. How could I be its sole guardian? Emma's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Well, now you don't have to worry about sharing or buying anyone out. It's yours, free and clear. Congratulations, Rachel. You got exactly what you always wanted." The accusation stung because there was some truth in it. I had always loved the cabin more openly than Emma, had always been the one to organize family trips there, to handle the maintenance and upkeep. "That's not fair," I said, my own anger finally surfacing. I never wanted it like this. I never wanted Mom to choose between us or to leave you out. If you'd shown more interest over the years, if you'd visited more than twice in the last 5 years, maybe Mom would have made a different decision. The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted their harshness. The silence that followed was arctic. I'd crossed a line, voiced the very criticism that had driven Mom's decision. Emma's lack of involvement with the cabin wasn't a secret, but saying it out loud felt cruel and final. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "So this is my fault? I'm to blame for Mom's favoritism and your betrayal?" I could hear her gathering her things, preparing to end the conversation. "Emma, please don't hang up. We need to figure this out," I said desperately, but I could already sense her pulling away. The sister who had grown up sleeping in the next bed, who had built fairy houses with me in the woods behind the cabin, was disappearing into the cold, successful woman she'd become. Our childhood connection was fracturing along with our family. "Figure what out, Rachel? There's nothing to figure out. The cabin is yours. Mom made sure of that. You kept her secret for 2 weeks, so clearly you're comfortable with the arrangement." Her words were precise and cutting, designed to end the conversation cleanly. I heard her moving around again, probably getting ready to hang up and pretend this call had never happened. "What about us?" I asked quietly. The question that had been haunting me since I'd learned the truth. What happens to our relationship now? Emma had been difficult and distant for years, but she was still my sister. The cabin was supposed to be a bridge between us, not a wall. Now it felt like Mom's decision had severed our last real connection. Emma was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired and sad. "I don't know, Rachel. I honestly don't know." There was something final in those words, a resignation that made my chest tight. She wasn't just talking about our immediate conflict. She was talking about whether we had a future as sisters at all. The call ended without goodbyes or promises to talk soon. Emma simply said she needed time to think, and then the line went dead. I sat in my kitchen holding the silent phone, feeling like I'd just witnessed the death of something precious. The cabin was mine, but the cost was becoming clearer with each passing moment. I'd gained a property and lost a sister in the same conversation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying different moments from the conversation, wishing I'd chosen different words, wishing I'd been braver about telling her sooner. The wine I'd poured sat untouched on my kitchen counter, a reminder of how unprepared I'd been for Emma's pain. In trying to protect her feelings by waiting, I'd only made everything worse. Now, I had to live with both Mom's controversial decision and my own cowardly handling of it. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't expected. The conversation with Emma had been devastating, but it had also stripped away all the pretense and uncertainty. The cabin was mine. Emma was furious, and our relationship was probably over. Those were the facts, and dwelling on guilt wouldn't change any of them. I made coffee and sat by my kitchen window, watching Portland wake up around me. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I called Sarah before 9, catching her during her morning routine. "I told Emma," I said without preamble when she picked up. Sarah had been my closest friend since college, and she'd seen me through every major crisis in my adult life. She knew how much the cabin meant to me, and she'd also witnessed years of Emma's casual dismissal of family traditions. Her response was immediate and unsurprising. How badly did she take it? "She hung up on me after accusing me of betrayal and favoritism," I said, stirring my coffee absently. "But Sarah, I'm not going to spend the next year apologizing for something I didn't orchestrate. Mom made this decision for her own reasons, and I'm tired of feeling guilty about it." Sarah was quiet for a moment, probably surprised by my sudden resolve. I'd expected to spend weeks agonizing over Emma's reaction, but instead I felt oddly liberated. "Good for you," Sarah said finally. "You've been walking on eggshells around Emma for years. Maybe it's time to stop." She was right, and hearing someone else say it out loud felt validating. Emma had always expected the family to accommodate her busy schedule, her geographic distance, her general lack of interest in maintaining relationships. Mom's decision suddenly seemed less shocking and more inevitable. Emma had been pulling away from us for years. I spent the morning researching property law and my responsibilities as owner. The legal transfer was clean and complete. Mom had handled everything properly, with witnesses and notarized documents. There was no way for Emma to challenge the ownership, even if she wanted to. The cabin was mine as definitively as anything could be in this world, but ownership meant more than just having my name on papers. By afternoon, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I called a local attorney and started exploring options for protecting the cabin's future. Not to sell it. That would betray everything Mom and Grandpa had built. But maybe there was a way to ensure it served a larger purpose. The idea was still forming, but I liked where my thoughts were heading. The cabin could be more than just our family's private retreat. The drive up to the cabin that Friday felt different than any I'd made before. This time, I wasn't visiting our family retreat. I was going home to my property. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. I rolled down the windows and let the mountain air fill my car, breathing in the scent of pine and earth that had defined my childhood summers. Whatever else happened, this place was mine to protect now. I spent the weekend going through every room methodically, making notes about repairs and improvements. The roof needed work, the kitchen appliances were ancient, and the plumbing made concerning noises. These weren't problems to solve someday. They were my responsibilities as the owner. The shift in perspective was both daunting and energizing. I'd been treating the cabin like a museum, but it needed to be a living, breathing home again. Sunday morning, I drove into town to meet with Mrs. Chen, the woman who'd been cleaning the cabin for Mom during her final years. She was a practical, no-nonsense person in her 60s who knew every family in Hood River. When I explained the situation, she nodded like she'd seen it all before. "Family property brings out the worst in people sometimes," she said simply. "But this place needs someone who'll take care of it." Mrs. Chen offered to continue the cleaning services and also recommended a local handyman for the repairs. More importantly, she mentioned that several families in town had been looking for a place to rent for reunions and special occasions. "Your cabin's got the perfect setup for it," she said. "Private enough for family time, but big enough for real gatherings." The idea clicked into place. Maybe there was a way to keep the cabin financially sustainable while honoring its purpose. The attorney meeting went smoothly. We discussed setting up protections so the cabin could never be sold inappropriately while giving me flexibility to manage it responsibly. The rental income could cover maintenance and improvements, and I could establish guidelines for family use. It felt like a way to honor both Mom's intentions and Grandpa's legacy without being trapped by financial burden. The cabin could thrive instead of just surviving. Emma's complete silence over the next week was somehow worse than her anger would have been. No emails, no calls, no attempts to continue our fight or find middle ground. She'd simply erased me from her life as efficiently as she handled everything else. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for some sign that she wanted to work things out. But Emma had always been decisive, and apparently she'd decided we were done. I threw myself into cabin planning with an energy that surprised everyone around me. I researched retreat centers and family rental properties, studied successful business models, and even reached out to other cabin owners in the area. The project gave me something constructive to focus on instead of dwelling on Emma's rejection. If she wanted to cut me out of her life, I couldn't stop her. But I could build something meaningful with what Mom had given me. 3 weeks after our disastrous phone call, I received a certified letter from Emma's law firm in San Francisco. My heart raced as I signed for it, wondering if she was challenging the inheritance legally. But when I opened the envelope, I found something that stung worse than any lawsuit: a formal request to remove all of her personal belongings from the cabin and ship them to California. She was cutting ties completely. The letter was written in legal language, cold and impersonal. But the message was clear. Emma wanted nothing more to do with the cabin or me. There was no suggestion of visiting one last time, no acknowledgement of the decades of family history contained in those rooms. She was treating it like the dissolution of a business partnership rather than the end of our sisterhood. Her efficiency was devastating. I drove up to the cabin that weekend with empty boxes and a surprisingly steady resolve. Packing Emma's belongings felt like closing a chapter rather than destroying it. Her books, her old sweatshirt, the coffee mug she'd claimed as her own. Each item went into boxes methodically. These were just objects now, not sacred relics. Emma had made her choice, and I was finally accepting it instead of fighting it. The work took most of the afternoon, and by evening I had 6 boxes ready to ship. I sat on the front porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar shades of gold and pink. The beauty didn't feel diminished by experiencing it alone. It felt different, more personal somehow. This was my sunset now, my view, my responsibility to appreciate and preserve for whoever came next. I shipped Emma's boxes on Monday morning with a simple note. I'm sorry it ended this way. The cabin will always be part of your story, even if you choose to leave it behind. I didn't expect a response, and when none came, I wasn't surprised. Emma had always been good at closing doors firmly behind her. Now she'd closed the door on us, and I was finally ready to stop trying to prop it open. The following weekend, I hosted my first rental family at the cabin. Watching 3 generations of the Morrison family spread out across the property, building fires and sharing meals and creating their own memories, felt like witnessing the cabin's rebirth. They left behind laughter echoing in the rafters and thank you notes on the kitchen counter. The cabin was serving its purpose again, just not in the way any of us had originally imagined. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I realized that Mom's decision had given me more than just a property. She'd given me the chance to write the cabin's next chapter, to be its guardian and caretaker in ways Emma never would have embraced. The responsibility felt heavy but also right, like finally growing into shoes that had been waiting for me to claim them. I was home. 3 months passed before I heard Emma's name again, and it came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen called on a Tuesday morning while I was at work, her voice unusually hesitant. "Rachel, honey, I wasn't sure if I should mention this, but I thought you should know. Your sister called yesterday asking about the cabin's rental schedule." I felt my stomach drop. Emma had been monitoring the property from a distance, watching what I was doing with our family's legacy. "What did she want to know exactly?" I asked, stepping away from my desk to take the call privately. Mrs. Chen explained that Emma had somehow found the rental listing online and called pretending to be a potential customer. She'd asked detailed questions about availability, pricing, and what changes had been made to the property. When Mrs. Chen mentioned my name as the owner, Emma had hung up abruptly. The thought of Emma investigating my life from afar felt invasive and sad. That evening, I found myself staring at the rental website I'd created for the cabin. The photos showed families laughing around the fire pit, children playing in the yard, grandparents reading on the front porch. It was exactly what the cabin was meant for, bringing people together, creating memories, serving as a sanctuary from the busy world. But knowing Emma had seen these same images, had witnessed how I'd transformed our private retreat into something public, made me question everything. I called Sarah that night, needing to talk through the strange mixture of guilt and defiance I was feeling. "She's checking up on you," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "That means she's not as detached from the situation as she pretended to be." Maybe Sarah was right. But Emma's secretive surveillance felt more like judgment than interest. She was probably documenting my choices, building a case in her mind about how I was betraying our family's privacy. The next weekend at the cabin, I found myself seeing it through Emma's eyes for the first time in months. The guest registry filled with strangers' names, the professional photos hanging in the hallway, the laminated house rules posted in each bedroom. Had I turned our sacred family space into just another business? The Morrison family had left behind such warm memories, but maybe Emma saw their presence as an invasion rather than a gift. I spent Saturday morning walking the property boundaries, something I hadn't done since childhood. The old trail markers Grandpa had carved into trees were still there, weathered but visible. The creek where Emma and I used to catch crawfish still bubbled through the back section of land. These natural features belonged to our family history, but they also belonged to the land itself. Maybe sharing them with other families wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was stewardship. Sunday brought the Patel family for their weekend retreat, and watching their teenage daughter discover the rope swing Dad had built decades ago reminded me why I'd started the rental program in the first place. The cabin came alive with voices and laughter again, instead of sitting empty for months between my visits. 3 generations were using the space exactly as it was designed to be used. Would Emma prefer it gathered dust as a monument to our estrangement? Mrs. Chen stopped by during the Patel's stay, bringing fresh towels and her usual no-nonsense observations. "Your sister called again," she said quietly while the family was hiking. This time she asked about the condition of the master bedroom and whether you'd changed anything in there. I felt a chill. The master bedroom had been Mom and Dad's room, the most private and personal space in the cabin. Why was Emma specifically asking about it? That night, I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, trying to see what Emma might be concerned about. I'd left it mostly unchanged. The same furniture, the same curtains, even the same family photos on the dresser. But I had updated the bedding and added a small desk by the window for guests who might need to work during their stay. Was this modernization the kind of change Emma feared I'd make throughout the property? The thought that Emma was watching my every move from across the country was exhausting. I'd spent months building confidence in my decisions, learning to trust my instincts about the cabin's care and use. Now I found myself second-guessing every choice, wondering how she would interpret each change or improvement. Her silent surveillance was somehow more oppressive than her anger had been. At least when she was yelling, we were communicating. I decided to call Mom's old attorney, partly for legal advice, but mostly for perspective. He'd known our family for decades and had handled the transfer paperwork personally. "Your mother was very specific about her reasons," he reminded me gently. "She wanted the cabin to stay active and loved, not preserved like a museum. She specifically mentioned her concern that Emma would let it sit empty." His words were reassuring, but they also made Emma's distant monitoring more painful. The attorney suggested something that hadn't occurred to me. Maybe I should document my stewardship activities formally, keeping records of improvements and maintenance alongside the rental income and expenses. "Not for legal protection," he clarified, "but for your own peace of mind. You're doing exactly what your mother hoped you would do." The idea appealed to me, creating a clear record of how I was honoring the family legacy. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Chen called with news that made my hands shake. "Your sister booked a stay," she said without preamble. She used her married name, but I recognized the phone number from her previous calls. "She's coming next month for a long weekend," said she's traveling alone. I sat down hard in my office chair, feeling the careful equilibrium I'd built start to wobble. Emma was coming back to the cabin after all these months of silence. The booking request was formal and impersonal, just like everything else Emma had done since our phone call. She'd selected dates when I wouldn't be there, paid the full rate through the website, and included no personal message or acknowledgement of our relationship. She was treating me like any other property manager, coming to inspect what I'd done with our inheritance. The clinical nature of her approach somehow hurt more than outright hostility would have. I spent the next few days oscillating between hope and dread. Maybe Emma's visit meant she was ready to reconcile, ready to find some way forward together. But more likely, she was coming to gather evidence for whatever judgment she'd already formed about my management of the property. The woman who'd hung up on me and shipped back all her belongings wasn't coming home for a warm family reunion. Sarah suggested I leave a note for Emma, something simple that acknowledged the strangeness of the situation without being confrontational. But every draft I wrote sounded either too apologetic or too defensive. How do you welcome your estranged sister to what used to be your shared sanctuary? How do you explain that you've turned her childhood bedroom into a guest room without sounding like you erased her on purpose? In the end, I decided to treat Emma like any other guest, at least on the surface. I made sure the cabin was immaculate, left the standard welcome information on the kitchen counter, and stocked the refrigerator with basics. But I also left Mom's favorite cookbook open to the pancake recipe we'd all grown up with, a small signal that some things remained unchanged. Maybe Emma would see it as a peace offering, or maybe she'd see it as manipulation. The week of Emma's visit crawled by with agonizing slowness. Mrs. Chen promised to text me when Emma arrived and departed, but otherwise I was committed to staying away and giving her space to experience the cabin on her own terms. Part of me hoped she'd call or text during her stay, some acknowledgement that we were still family despite everything. But I tried to prepare myself for continued silence. On Friday afternoon, Mrs. Chen's text came through. "She's here. Looks tired." I stared at my phone for a long time, imagining Emma pulling into the driveway we'd traveled together countless times, seeing the cabin with fresh eyes after months of absence. Was she remembering our childhood adventures? Or was she cataloging all the ways I'd changed things? Would she feel like a stranger in the place that had shaped us both? That weekend felt endless. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for some word from Emma, but dreading what she might say. I cleaned my apartment twice, went for long walks, called Sarah repeatedly for reassurance. By Sunday evening, when Mrs. Chen texted that Emma had left, I felt both relieved and devastated. She'd come and gone without reaching out, maintaining the wall between us even while sleeping in our family home. The silence somehow felt more final than ever. Monday morning brought an unexpected call from Mrs. Chen. "She left something for you," she said simply. "An envelope on the kitchen counter with your name on it." My heart hammered as I drove up to the cabin that evening, wondering what Emma could possibly have to say after months of silence. The envelope sat exactly where Mrs. Chen had described it, white and crisp against the worn wooden counter where we'd eaten countless family meals together. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Emma's precise handwriting. "Rachel," it began, "I came here angry, ready to document everything you'd done wrong. Instead, I found a place that's more alive than it's been in years." I sank into Dad's old chair by the fireplace, my hands trembling as I read. Emma's words were carefully chosen, each sentence deliberate and honest in a way that reminded me of the sister I'd grown up with. "You kept Mom's garden," she wrote. "You fixed the porch railing that's been loose since we were teenagers. You left Grandpa's tools exactly where he always kept them." I looked around the room, seeing it through Emma's eyes during her solitary weekend. She'd noticed details I'd forgotten I'd preserved. Small choices that had felt automatic, but apparently meant something deeper to the sister who'd grown up here beside me. The letter continued. "The families who've stayed here left thank you notes. And I read every one. Children discovering the same hiding spots we used. Parents watching sunsets from the same porch where Mom read to us. You didn't just preserve this place, you fulfilled its purpose." I felt tears starting, not from sadness, but from recognition. Emma understood what I'd been trying to do, even if she couldn't forgive how it had happened. "I was wrong about the rental families being intrusions," she admitted on the second page. "They're exactly what Grandpa would have wanted. People making memories, children learning to love the mountains, families finding peace together. You turned our private sanctuary into something larger and more generous. Her words carried an acknowledgement I'd never expected to receive. Emma had come to judge and stayed to observe with an open heart. But the letter wasn't just praise. "I can't pretend this doesn't hurt," Emma wrote. "Knowing Mom chose you, knowing I'll never have the chance to prove her wrong about my commitment to this place. I've spent months being angry at you for something that wasn't your fault." The honesty was brutal and necessary. Emma wasn't absolving anyone of pain. She was simply acknowledging where responsibility actually lay. "I walked through every room this weekend remembering," she continued. "Our fort-building summers, Dad teaching us to fish in the creek, Mom's terrible attempts at campfire cooking. Those memories belong to both of us, regardless of whose name is on the deed." I closed my eyes, picturing Emma moving through the cabin alone, reconciling her childhood with the reality of what I'd built here. The next paragraph made me laugh despite my tears. "I noticed you finally replaced the bathroom faucet that dripped for 10 years. Mom would be proud of your practical improvements and horrified that it took losing her to motivate you." Emma's dry humor had always been her way of diffusing tension, and finding it in her letter felt like discovering a piece of our old relationship intact. "I want you to know that what you've created here is beautiful," Emma wrote near the end. "The cabin feels loved and purposeful in ways it never did when it was just sitting empty between our visits. You've made it a place where other families can build the same kinds of memories we treasured." Her approval meant more than I'd realized it would. Validation from the person whose judgment I'd feared most. The letter's final paragraph was the hardest to read. "I don't know if we can rebuild what we had as sisters, but I wanted you to know that I understand why Mom chose you. You always loved this place with your whole heart, while I loved it with conditions and limitations." Emma's self-awareness was painful and generous simultaneously. She was releasing me from guilt while acknowledging her own role in Mom's decision. She signed it simply Emma with a postscript that broke my heart. "Thank you for keeping the rope swing." Sitting there Saturday morning, I remembered being 10 years old and thinking this was the most beautiful place on earth. It still is. I folded the letter carefully, understanding that it was both an ending and a beginning. Emma had said goodbye to her anger, but not necessarily to our estrangement. I spent the next hour walking the property, seeing it through Emma's weekend eyes. The garden she'd mentioned was thriving, the vegetables I'd planted providing fresh herbs and tomatoes for rental families. The porch railing stood straight and strong after years of wobbling dangerously. Every improvement I'd made served both preservation and hospitality, honoring the past while embracing the present. Emma had seen that balance clearly. That evening, I wrote Emma back. Not a letter. That felt too formal now, but a simple email. "Thank you for taking the time to really see this place and what I've tried to do with it," I wrote. "You're always welcome here, not as a renter, but as family. The cabin will always be part of your story." I sent it before I could second-guess myself, then sat on the porch watching stars appear over the mountains. Emma's response came 2 days later, brief but warmer than anything we'd exchanged in months. "Maybe next summer I'll take you up on that invitation. I'd like to teach some rental kids how to catch crawfish in the creek." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was possibility. The door between us was opening just a crack, enough to let in hope for something better between us. The following weekend brought the Johnson family, 3 generations celebrating a grandfather's 80th birthday. Watching the elderly man teach his great-grandson to whittle on the front porch, seeing 4-year-old hands guided by 80-year-old wisdom, I understood something profound about the cabin's true purpose. It wasn't meant to preserve the past unchanged. It was meant to help the past nurture the future, generation after generation. Mrs. Chen stopped by during the Johnson stay, bringing her usual practical updates and one surprising observation. "Your sister looked peaceful when she left, different than when she arrived." I nodded, thinking about Emma's letter and the grace she'd shown in recognizing what I'd built here. Maybe peace was the best outcome we could hope for, even if complete reconciliation remained uncertain. Summer deepened into fall, and the cabin's calendar filled with families seeking autumn retreats. I started a tradition of leaving a guest book where visitors could record their memories, and reading their entries became my favorite evening ritual. Children wrote about discovering salamanders under logs, parents described perfect morning coffee on the porch, grandparents mentioned feeling connected to simpler times. The cabin was creating new stories while honoring old ones. As the first snow dusted the mountains in November, I realized I'd stopped thinking about the cabin as a burden or responsibility. It had become simply home. My home to share, my legacy to nurture, my gift to protect for whoever came next. Mom's decision had given me more than property. It had given me purpose and the chance to love something larger than myself. Emma and I exchanged occasional emails now. Nothing profound, but signs of life between us. She sent photos from her business trips. I sent pictures of particularly beautiful sunsets from the cabin porch. We were rebuilding slowly, carefully, like strangers learning to trust. The cabin had wounded us and was now helping us heal, one small connection at a time. Standing on the porch as winter settled over the mountains, I finally understood what Mom had seen that prompted her difficult choice. Emma would have preserved the cabin as a monument to our family's past, but I was helping it become a bridge to other families' futures. Both approaches honored our legacy, but only one kept the cabin's heart beating. Mom had chosen the guardian she believed would keep this place alive, and for the first time, I felt worthy of her trust.